Hey everybody, welcome back or welcome to the Science of Gaming series. I am Taylor Johnson, and in this episode, we speak with Valens. He talks about his background and how he got to where he is now, coming from tech and then now being in esports and being a coach and an analyst. We talk about a lot of really cool things and jam out on just coaching in general and different concepts of coaching and how analytics are folded into that process. Had a great time doing this episode. I hope you enjoy. Be sure to stay tuned towards the end for a debrief. Soham, it's great to have you on.
Nice to see you, Taylor.
Excellent, man. So if you could give us a brief background on yourself, how you kind of got to now, what you're up to, and what you're working on.
Sure. So I'm working at Evil Geniuses now. I just recently came here from Cloud9, and the overall goal is to be the kind of leader of the data science division and in esports, and obviously in Evil Geniuses right now. The way I got here, obviously several years, I was an engineer first, and that kind of translated into when Counter-Strike Go started to become bigger. I wanted to see if I could kind of make it pro myself as a player. So my trajectory was becoming a pro as a player, and spent many years playing with Automatic at the time, and that led to kind of the coaching positions when I decided to kind of do more engineering stuff full time, and coaching on the side. So that's initially how I got into coaching with TSM and then Cloud9. And then Cloud9 kind of offered me a position where it was like, hey, why don't you do this full time, lead our data science division? And then I stopped doing engineering completely and went to esports full time. And that was, I want to say, late 2017. So I've been kind of in esports full time probably for the last, two and a half years almost. And I mean, yeah, I never thought it would be possible, but that's how I got here.
Awesome. Appreciate that. And appreciate what you're doing in the space too. I mean, I think we met 2 years ago at the ECS 6 in Arlington, at the Esports Stadium Arlington, and jammed out about performance and what's possible in the space. And so I'm just grateful for our friendship and seeing you evolve in your career as well. It's been awesome.
Likewise, man. I always keep up to tabs on kind of what you've been up to and what your companies have been up to, and it's great to see you guys moving the needle in the space as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, cool. So I want to kind of kick it off and, let's talk about data and analytics, right? So when you're working with a team or with a player and you're looking at film and you're doing a debrief and creating analysis, what's kind of the process and what is the framework in which you think about that?
So you cut off a little bit, but I think you're asking kind of how do we go through the film analysis process and debrief process after matches and practice and things like that?
Yep, correct.
I think the number one thing is you first need to make sure you have something to review, and that obviously means that we're recording scrims. If you're playing matches, then we're looking at the in-game demo or a video, or VOD, people say video on demand of that match that we just played. And usually we try to overlay the communication aspect on top of that. So it won't be synced up, especially if you're doing like a match review of like a video or a demo. So the first thing you want to do is take your communication from whatever it is, Discord, TeamSpeak, the main ones that are used in CS:GO, Dota, League of Legends, and overlay that, sync it up with the video, make sure the start time is right. So that's like the very first step. There's nothing to review unless you can get something to review and make it easily digestible, right? So that's the first step. The process itself, I think, it kind of starts with the coaches or the coaching staff. There's generally more than one. It's like you have maybe a head coach, you have an assistant coach, you might even have an analyst. At least for Counter-Strike and League of Legends, this is the standard pretty much. You have like 2 or 3 folks in the coaching staff. So this support staff would usually have already seen the film, so to speak, beforehand, taking notes and be able to kind of efficiently know this is what we're going to review, and this is kind of the talking points that they want to share with the players. Because otherwise, if you give kind of along the player attention spans, along with kind of they're ready to play for the current day as well, the schedule of the day, and this is all stuff that can be optimized, and things that I'm learning from you and in your company as well is you want to make sure really that the film day is for film day, so that you get the most kind of bang for the buck when you're reviewing. So that process then starts, and the goal usually to make it useful for the day is we take a chunk of, let's say we're working on these kinds of man up situations that we're not doing well in. So then we approach that practice day or the film day for saying, this is what we're going to focus on. And today, what we apply to the scrims following the films, we'll be taking into account kind of working on this specific area or these two specific areas. So if you kind of do a broad kind of paintbrush of things you want to look over, there's not really that much you can then apply to the follow-up practice games and scrims. So usually we want to limit it to one or two things, and generally we will pick an issue, like the coaching staff will pick an issue that is kind of, there's a pattern of us doing really poorly on, or there's a pattern of us kind of doing randomly well, which is just as important because we want to translate randomness into something that's consistent, right? So if you're doing something well, but it doesn't seem totally consistent, we want to talk about, okay, guys, like this is the situations where we are doing something well, but it doesn't seem like we know why we're doing it well. So let's translate that into kind of top of mind that we then take into practice.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I love that. The randomness and make that consistent, especially if it's a good randomness.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side of that is if there's some, discrepancies or some bad randomness, it's trying to figure out, well, why is that happening and not that have that happen again. So when you're looking at that type of analysis, what type of data are you looking at as well?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of we as coaches and players both, we get a lot of feedback from players, obviously, because they're the ones that are actually playing this game, 10 hours a day, right? What are important events in a game? So they're usually, let's take Counter-Strike, for example, there's usually times where in a round there becomes these trigger points or like these points of the round that are influential to the rest of the round. So if you can come up with a list of that, I'll share a couple examples. Obviously, I don't want to share too much, but
Sure.
For example, there comes a point of the round where we're trying to take map control and the other team might be resisting or might be countering us with some aggression back, or maybe they're just giving it up. There's usually like three possibilities. It's like we're trying to take map control in some area and we either see no one, they're playing passive, or they're resisting us while we're taking it, or we take it and then they try to take it back. So usually kind of, if you think of it as kind of like a tree, like a branch is coming down from that point, it's kind of like, okay, we did X, we took map control here. What is their reaction? And then we go down kind of from there. So these important kind of points of a round is something you really need to map out. And as a professional team, and especially if you're aspiring to be a pro, especially, is you really need to think about what those points are that your team or you yourself struggle with, or some areas that will really help, especially a developing team, is think about these times of the round that you naturally are doing something that is making your life easier for the rest of the round, but you haven't thought about why that is. It's an instinctual response, maybe that when you hear this flash, you're already turned around and then you peek after. That's like an instinctual response some people and some players do, but they don't think about how can I get my team involved to make this play even better? Or what does this mean? If you hear a flash pop in Counter-Strike especially, but you don't hear the flash being released, it means that there's actually two people that you're facing on the other team, the person who threw the flash and the person who's peeking with it. So you can immediately say where two of the five players are now. Along with the other information you're getting in your Discord or your TeamSpeak, you can map out throughout the round where these five enemy players actually are. And then you can decide what's my counter aggression, how can I take map control easier somewhere else where there's less people than there should be in terms of enemies. These are the kinds of data points that we're looking at.
Yeah, I love that. I've always had such a deep respect for the amount of strategy that goes into that as well. And I love the concept of that tree. You have those trigger points or those instances that happen within the game, and then creating a flow chart of that, being able to map out, okay, what decisions were made at this point and what decisions were made at this point, what was the outcome? And I think that's incredibly beneficial to players, especially aspiring players who are trying to learn to understand the game on a deeper level, to really get in the habit of when they do their debriefs, to really think methodically on how they can set themselves up for success in the future by doing that level of depth of analysis.
Yeah, I think you hit it kind of perfectly. It's you don't necessarily just have to know what to learn. You also need to work on how to learn, and learning how to learn is just as important in esports and in life, obviously, too. But that's something that, players are very preoccupied with, making sure that they're standing out amongst the rest of the players in this space, that it's hard to then also work on your mechanical skill, but also think about the game deeply and also make sure you're learning and taking learnings from game to game or practice to practice or pug to pug even, right, when you're doing a pickup game. So it's a difficult road for players when they have no guidance in esports, which compared to traditional sports, as I know we've had discussions about this in the past. The infrastructure is just not there yet to have kind of a little league, which leads into a high school sports, then collegiate level, and then after that minor leagues and major leagues, right? So that there's no supporting staff throughout this entire step of the way like there is in traditional sports. So the I guess the stress of learning how to do all of these things kind of fall on the players until they get into like the semi-pro or pro level, which then they finally get coaching staff. So yeah, I think learning how to learn is probably the biggest obstacle for up and coming players, I think.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think that's a huge opportunity in the space as well, and just as individuals to take these concepts and apply them not only to gaming but to just life in general. Which I love that you touched on that.
Yep.
And understanding your learning styles and being able to distinguish your strengths and weaknesses is incredibly important. And again, going back to that flowchart analysis, I mean,
Yep.
we do that in traditional sports, and even in martial arts. I mean, I've studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a long time, and we would map out flowcharts of every single offensive and defensive move. And with every position and every move, there's a counter and an offensive move.
Wow.
And just being able to see that and map it out, I mean, those are mental repetitions. But then being able to take a step back and say, okay, well, what are my strengths and weaknesses? What are my learning? Like, what can I do to better my learning styles? And I think, again, because there's not that official path to pro, it's very hard for individuals to really pick up on that, and it needs to start very early on, for all games and all industries and all sports, really. And traditional sports just happen to have an upper hand because of those little league teams and whatnot that kind of build that path. But there are a lot of similarities that could cross over.
Yeah, I think the floor charts are definitely something that the mental repetition aspect of it, you can't beat that, because you're not going to be able to get really, really good repetitions in the same situations come up in every single practice game, because it's not up to you, right? It's not up to you if the other team is going to consistently try to take map control or do a play that is the same across different teams you're playing throughout the day in practice, across different matches. Once it happens, you need to really store it in your mind as a little bit of like hey, I'm starting to notice a trend of when I can figure out this play is about to happen, and then store it in your mind so then you can pull it out when you see something similar. And it probably almost always in terms of semi-pro, pro CS, you will never see the same thing again. You'll just see something similar, and you need to be able to adapt what you know. It's just like, you don't want to, in school, plug and chug your way through high school and college, right? You need to really know why the equations work, and how do you apply it when your teacher throws at you a different type of question that you haven't seen on your homework. So I think it's the same kind of, it's about life. Knowing how to learn about these kinds of things helps you not just in Counter-Strike. I mean, and similarly, knowing how to learn growing up and having like that support around you for school and other sports, it helps you in Counter-Strike as well.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, that could be a whole separate conversation of really dropping into that, because there's so much there to really think about and apply. Yeah, that's great. Okay, cool. So let's transition a little bit into, once you've collected that information, that data, you've had those conversations, how can you then, and you may have touched on this a little bit, but how can you then think about how to set up a more productive practice, for the coaches, for the players, and then what is the application and the strategies moving forward?
Sure. Yeah, I think a big part of any team's kind of weekly or monthly time spent is, majority of that is practice. If you're traveling for events, obviously it becomes events and practicing within those events. But in any given week, let's say, you're playing, let's say 5-6 practice games a day, 5 days a week. That's 30 games that you are having repetitions of. And it's not 30 trivial games, right? They're 30 games that you're playing against the best of the best as well, most of the time. So if you compare a week where you have 5 or 6 days of practice, and then you have 1 or 2 matches at the weekend, let's say, you're getting 2 matches, but 30 or 40, so 6 to 7 times more reps in practice. So making those practice games productive should be number one priority for any single professional and aspiring to be professional team. And that then falls back into the players and the coaching stuff to how do you do that, right? So yeah, now you have this flow chart, or at least you try to map it out. You probably need to break it down by map. You know, in Counter-Strike, there's 7 maps, picks 5 or 6 that you guys want to play as a team. Generally, teams have 1 permanent ban. In League of Legends, there's only 1 map, right? In Dota, there's only 1 map, so to speak. But then, you know, take it a level deeper, then it's not about the map, talking about the lanes then. So, you know, it applies in all of esports. But anyway, for making practice productive at this point, 1, what do you want to practice that day? Or what do you want to practice in that scrim block? Generally, there's usually 2 scrim blocks per practice day. It's there's like a 3-hour block with 1 team, then there's a break, and then there's a 3-hour block after. So what you really want to do is for those different scrim blocks, you want to be able to set for yourself, who are we playing? What type of team are they? What maps are we playing? So it's not just EGs playing Liquid, and Liquid is a very team play-oriented team. It's, hey, EG is scrimming Liquid on Inferno, Nuke, and Dust 2. And Liquid on Inferno is a team that tries to take map control very aggressively. So on Inferno, we're playing an aggressive type of team. So what do we want to work out today against an aggressive type of team on Inferno? That's the kind of approach that should be going into practice. Doesn't matter if you're playing Stewie 2K or Liege, it's as a team, how do they play? And then it's kind of up to the players at this point, and coaches obviously help with this, is, okay, so I'm playing Liquid, we know overall they're aggressive, but how does Stewie like to take banana himself, right? It becomes kind of a dance along the different parts of the map, and being able to kind of be knowing going into practice that this is how I'm going to try to dance today, right? And it's a funny analogy, but it is really a dance. Taking banana control in Inferno, you're trying to counter utility, you're trying to counter what the other team is doing or the other person is doing on that part of the map as it's happening. You have to be able to dance, and knowing kind of what you're going to be working on, what steps you're going to be working on in that dance, right? I think it's the only way you can actually take something away from practice, because you're going into practice knowing what do you want to try out and what you want to test out. And again, you won't know what you want to test out unless you think about what type of player or team you're playing against and how they play that map. So it's a very, majority of the prep work for practice goes into making it productive. And if you don't think about things like that, you won't have a productive day of practice.
Yeah, I love that. So, what I'm hearing is essentially you're kind of setting the container for practice, and you're building out these contextual layers, right? Because the more context you have this overarching objective, then you have these strategies and the tactics, and every single one of those points is based upon, 1, the team that you're playing, 2, the composition of the team, the map that you're playing, whether they're aggressive or the style of play. And I think for some people, they tend to overlook that granularity, but it's really important. And people may be thinking about it, but maybe they're not drilling down far enough. So I love that, how you kind of lay that out. And it's very true. I love the analogy of a dance. It is very much a dance, and it's very much a back and forth, and kind of being able to flow and being able to adjust. And I've always thought that if you have a blueprint, a general objective, and a general understanding of what could happen, that allows you the freedom to be more creative within that container. Because if you just go into practice, or if you go into a game and be like, all right, we just want to win. Well, of course you want to win, but how do you want to win? And what does that look like when you start to reverse engineer the different strategies and the tactics, and knowing the personnel, and really thinking on a more granular level of what needs to be true for us to win? And then also, what are some potential downfalls? And that kind of takes me back to, I definitely want to circle back to that one point about the learning how to learn and noticing similar instances, because you're right. I don't think you're ever going to experience the same exact set piece within a game, but you might get close. And for players, this is really important. I spoke with DDK about this, of journaling and taking that mental note, but then also writing it out, saying, okay, at this map, at this time frame, with this type of player, this is what I experienced, and this is how I reacted. Was it a positive or negative reaction? And this kind of also leads into something I want to ask you is, if there's a point in a match where an individual has a negative outcome, and then after that they tend to tilt, and then that throws off their entire game. Is that taken into account with the debriefs and the practice? And then maybe is the sports psychologist kind of come into play to help work with them, create that notice and naming and identify those triggers?
That's a great question. I think as a coach, you kind of have the power, but also you have the responsibility to make sure that when you identify problems to discuss, especially in a team setting, uh, it's based on patterns and not based on one-off situations. So I think, for example, my coaching style when I was coaching C9 and teams before that, if I notice someone doing something they shouldn't be doing, either they say something to a teammate that probably is in the heat of the moment, or they're making consistent kind of mental mistakes or lapses in judgment, anything related to a specific player, I generally don't bring that up in a team practice setting unless it's something that is happening over and over again, and then we discuss it. And for those specific kind of individualized mistakes, getting the sports psychologist involved for the mental aspects of it is super important. And sometimes it's not even the sports psychologist talking with the player themselves. Sometimes it's me getting advice from the sports psychologist, or not me, but the coaches, right? I still consider myself a coach in some ways, but
Of course. Yeah.
basically getting feedback from people around you that have expertise, right? I mean, a coach for an esport has his expertise areas, and then the sports psychologist has his, and the players has his. So it's kind of figuring it out. Okay, how do you help a player that is highly skilled, but he can't get away from missing a shot, or he can't get away from the fact that his teammate flashed him when he's trying to make a peak, and now he's getting a little tilted, right? So those are things that in practice we don't necessarily discuss beyond the fact that it's like, okay, guys, we missed this shot, obviously because a teammate did something you didn't expect. Let's talk about what you did expect, or what would you want next time in a similar situation, right? Every single thing we talk about during practice reviews with the team should be centered around kind of, okay, how can I generalize this enough so that next time around we are on the same page? And that could be based on something we just did well that we saw. It could be based on something we are not doing well. And it could just be based on something that it didn't even matter in this particular round, but it could have mattered, right? There's a lot of times during review that you notice that because we have X-ray on, we can see what the other team is doing through the walls and things like that for review. And you might see that, hey, we could have gotten countered, or we could have gotten punished for something that we weren't even aware of. Let's talk about that. How do we make this better? So it's very important that making practices about how do you generalize things that you see, so you don't insert opinions or I guess suggestions in players' minds that they cannot then apply to a situation that comes up. First step, you review. You look at the round in multiple different perspectives, not just one run through, right? You look at a round, then maybe you take the camera off first person, you look around the map and follow players around, or you follow a particular part of the map. Then from there, what can we take that? How do we generalize this situation that happened that we want to discuss, so that now players can remember it across multiple different 2-3 days from now, 2-3 weeks from now? Oh, Soham said that, hey guys, when the other team consistently is throwing this type of utility, it looks like they're doing this type of map control. That it's a style now. So in the brain, then when they see this style of map control, immediately think about, okay, what can we do to counter this style of map control? Not necessarily like, okay, hey, if they throw this molly, this flash, then this nade, guys, they're probably doing this. That's too specific, right? You want to have the players be able to generalize. It's a type of or a style of map control that they're doing. Let's counter that style, and it allows people's individual styles also to come out. You're giving them creative freedom to kind of counter something that's happening, and that's huge because you want to get players engaged. You don't want them, you don't want to be focusing or limiting players based off of what me as a coach who doesn't even play the game as much, right, thinks is best.
Yeah, I love that. Man, you just touch on so many great points in that. So, okay, so the first thing that I heard that I think is awesome is, maybe it's not best to have the sports psychologist speak directly to the individual, but to have you or another coach be the bridge to have that conversation. I think too often people tend to bring in, external resources to have those conversations without really meeting the person where they're at. And I think there's always a time and a place to really identify and have that conversation, and also gain the trust of that individual. And so I think at first, speaking on the general team level and addressing, hey, so here's what, just very clear and candid, here's what happened. Okay, so this is what happened after, and not really calling that individual out, because nobody likes to get called out. And it helps foster this, I'm a huge believer in building a candid culture, so that you can speak openly and There's no emotion involved in it. It's very clear cut. This is what happened. This is what happened thereafter. Individuals could then take responsibility for it. And that builds trust within the unit. And I think on the general level, addressing it with the team and figuring out, okay, well, what happens next? What happens before? What happens after? But then speaking to the individual and saying, okay, well, what can we do as a support staff, and what can we do to help you as an individual, so that when you get in these situations, you have the tools to be able to clear that and not have it impact you for the rest of the game. And I love the whole style of play. I mean, I think that in of itself allows, again, to create that container of that creativity, and everybody has their own unique style of play. And when you can identify who your matchup is, or you can identify this opponent and the individuals on that opponent, their styles, you can then start to be creative. And then it goes back to the whole dance analogy of being able to kind of flow with those stylistic approaches and really have people shine. I mean, I think a lot of times people surprise themselves at how really good they are when they're put in a situation and they're allowed to be fully creative, and just like, it's like hitting flow state and they're just like, I blacked out. I don't even know what happened, but I just got like, you know, back-to-back kills and we just won the game. So I think that's really cool, man.
You hit, I mean, I feel like your understanding of kind of what makes people tick, especially in a competitive environment, and how do you succeed as a team is super on point. And I'm sure that comes from your background in martial arts and sports and just in general research in this area. But you hit a lot of the same points that I've been thinking about throughout the last few years.
Yeah, I think, well, thanks for that. And also I mean, I've always felt that performance is performance, right? And what we're trying to do is reverse engineer the best outcomes and put people in the best positions to be successful. And so much about what you've been talking about so far on this call is really to identify, okay, the framework that enables individuals to be the most creative and set themselves up for success individually and as an entire unit. And so much of that whole process, I mean, I'm a firm believer that there needs to be a process in place. And once you have that scaffolding, right, that structure, then you can start to really kind of ebb and flow with whatever comes up. So, I mean, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I think it's super exciting.
Yeah, and using data to do and accomplish kind of what we're talking about, it shows up in, I think, multiple different ways. One is, obviously we are recording practice whenever we're playing. That's a given. All pro teams do it, and you're only recording your perspective. But what it actually does is it's almost a better indicator of how you should be reacting, because when you're playing a match, you only have your perspective, right? It's not like you can see what the other team is doing. As spectators in some games like League of Legends and Dota, you can see what everything, every single player on the enemy team, your team is doing. But obviously, you don't have coaches standing behind you in those games either. So you really want to, when you're practicing, when you're playing to win or you're playing to practice, what I like to really frame it as is you're just playing to constantly react. You're not playing to not win or not lose and make sure you get your practice in. It's like, okay, maybe we're going into this game plan for practice to be able to practice our aggressive map control. But guess what? Maybe the other team is playing so passive, right? You won't know that until you get into that practice game and you see what the other team is doing. Maybe we go in thinking Liquid is an aggressive map controller. They like to play aggressive CT sides. But today they're practicing passive CT sides. Do you want to then start to do things that don't make sense, that you would never do in matches against this type of style that you clearly see it's not the way to counter? So it's really important that you're practicing to, I almost want to say, not even consistently react. You want to start reacting consistently. So it's like, we want to practice aggressive map control, but they're giving up map control anyway. They're playing passive. Okay, guys, let's practice in being able to get into areas of the map silently, because they won't know we're there, and then do something different. So we swap our practice to this other style if it's in our playbook. If it's not, what we would do is, after practicing, like, guys, we don't have a way to play against passive teams, right? So again, like, using data to identify play styles from historic, maybe with that sets the kind of like ground for going into practice being productive. Then you need to use the data over time during your practice games, right? We can analyze those practice games, the videos from that. How to do that, I won't get into, but we can definitely do it. And then, decide, okay, this is the different types of playbooks we have seen that certain teams like to use. These are ways we can counter not teams, but we can counter play styles. And that's how you generalize. You don't want to counter 20 other top teams. you want to counter 5 other play styles, which encompasses 20 other top teams.
Got it. Yeah, that's awesome. Man, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time to do this. If you could kind of maybe give, 2 to 3, key points for aspiring pros or current pros. I mean, what would be, 2 to 3 kind of key points you'd want people to really focus on to really level up their game?
One, I think don't give up on each other. If you go into a team that you see the strengths and weaknesses of each other in the first place, I think being okay with failing in some ways is something that players, especially younger players, really need to be okay with. And it's really difficult to keep that into perspective when you don't have a support staff, right? When you're trying to be getting to that semi-pro scene breakthrough, just realize that there are strengths and weaknesses in every single player. You need to see if it complements your own. And if it does, stay together. That's number one. Number two, all these hubs out there to play pickup games and like kind of play this, I guess, off team brand of Counter-Strike and other games. It's good. There's a place for it, but don't make that your primary way to practice. If you are trying to practice outside of a team environment, go into a server by yourself and visualize and do the repetitions that you would do in a team environment. And then if you want to play some pickup games, of course, go for it, right? Keep your individual skill up. But don't make that your primary way of practicing outside of a team environment. Number one, you won't play like that. You're only going to be creating habits that you're practicing in a way that 80% of what you do will not be used. And I think that's something to keep in mind. And number three, I think have a process for yourself in how to get better. So whether it's a pickup game, whether it's after a scrim, whether it's after a match, whether it's after a team talk, it doesn't matter. If it's after something that you're investing your time into during the day, you should reflect. And that reflection process looks differently for everyone. Some people need a break after something that happens and then reflect later. Some people need to journal right away so they don't forget. Other people, for me, what works for me is that at the end of the night, I take an inventory kind of what I worked on today and what I need to work on tomorrow. And that way, for the rest of the night, after I write that piece down, I don't think about it at all. Because I know what I'm going to be thinking about starting tomorrow, I can have a stress-free rest of the night. And that's something that works for me. It might not work for everyone. So have a process and how to get better.
Awesome. Man, that last point is huge. I always encourage people, whether it's right after the event or, at the very least, like you said, before bed or as you're trying to wind down, do a brain dump. It's only going to help you clear your mind. It takes, anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Write it all down, get it out of your system, because then tomorrow morning, the day after, you can go and look at it and be like, okay, fresh eyes, and really then prioritize. So I love that you touched on that. All 3 of those points are great. Thanks so much, man, for being a part of this. Again, just really want to acknowledge you for your awesome career and everything you're doing in the space and the impact you're having. Really appreciate it.
Coach Taylor, Coach Johnson, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And, I look up to you in many different ways as well. I'm going to keep collaborating with you and keep doing your thing as well.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Hey, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did. Speaking of Valens, was a lot of fun. We covered some really good stuff. So I wanted to give you a quick recap. We'll talk about his background and how he got to where he is now. His take on film analysis, debriefing after matches, and setting up practice. How to develop an understanding of how and what to learn and the importance of that. The struggles of becoming a professional player and things to look out for. Strategies for setting up productive practice for the players and the coaches. The dance of competition and learning to pick up on similar scenarios in game and how to practice that. Using data to accomplish in-game outcomes. And we end with 3 key points to focus on to level up your game. We hope you enjoyed this episode and learned a lot from it. Stay tuned. Got more stuff coming out soon. Thanks and have a good day.